The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. Today I'll be telling a story that's the beginning of a new trilogy. This story is not in any of the published books. Our format is give you the story. The next episode of the podcast will be compassionate response to that story. They all involve some kind of suffering and movement through with struggle, often towards truth, which sets us free. So compassionate response will be next week. The third and final installment of this story would be a spiritual practice that comes to mind based upon the story. The story today is one that I'm calling Sergeant Mason, Chewing Gum, and Archangel Michael. This story involves a person who was a young journalist in the early 1940s, subsequent to Pearl Harbor. He said, a young, healthy American like me just could not have not been in the military service. After Pearl Harbor, that was just unthinkable. Everyone would have had to enlist. He said, I was already a young journalist, so that was my skill. I brought that skill to my recruiter, and they directed me towards being a war correspondent. Those were needed. So he said we were a little analogous to a chaplain in that we did have to go through basic training and we did know how to use a weapon, but it was understood that the chaplain or the war correspondent wasn't going to be at the front lines. Their job there was different than that of many other people in the unit. All right, that's not difficult to understand. He said that the issue was that as a journalist, he always wanted to tell the truth. And as a war correspondent, there were many times when he was able to do that in a way that was satisfactory to the people in the chain of command above him. But there were times when they didn't want a story told, or they wanted him to tell a story that he knew wasn't true. Or at least in courtroom language, it was not the whole truth and nothing but the truth, where it was where something was either completely untrue or nearly so. He said that there was a lot of pressure. For one thing, he said in World War II, unlike World War One, when the United States entered World War One, it had been going on for several years already, and we were only in it for a year and a half, something like that, before it ended. And it was fought largely on one front in Europe, well, at least on one continent. It was called a world war, but it wasn't nearly on the scale of the Pacific theater and the European theater that unfolded in World War II. Our American involvement started in the Pacific. He said our resources were spread very thin, but you didn't want an enemy to know that. So, and you wanted cohesion. So the stories needed to inspire or to describe cooperation of a populist kind, a kind of a everything motivated by love of country and unity and defeating a foreign oppressor or several of them. He said he got into his unit. He said that they cast the net so widely when they were bringing people into the service in such large numbers that not everyone was a good human person, that there were some who were not people of high degree of moral goodness. And he said sometimes they became the sergeant or the commander of a unit, and then sometimes their personalities would color the personality of the men of the group in their charge. They weren't always just good people to be around or even cooperative. He said some of the units were identified by the state that they were from. So there'd be a Massachusetts regiment and an Alabama regiment. He said this was before the service was integrated, so there wasn't white and black racial issues, but there were regional differences, and sometimes Those had to do with somebody being citified and somebody being more of a country bumpkin. Different levels of education could be right beside one another. Things that people could clash over or quarrel about were sometimes in close proximity. And even though all these young men were fighting on the same side, sometimes they fought one another. And he said, when you take a bunch of young people and you put them in a highly stressful, violent environment and you teach them how to use weapons to solve problems, disputes, international ones, sometimes it kind of comes back to bite you. That young men who've been trained to be violent might be violent in ways that you wish they hadn't. And then a war correspondent might not be able to speak truly about incidences where there was violence within a unit. Here's the dream that I received. It came during the night of August 27th, 2021. So as I'm recording this podcast, that's now almost 4 years ago. Here's the story as I received it and wrote it down. Rival divisions within an army got into a horrific argument. Many were killed over an argument about a stick of chewing gum. Someone took some and took a bite of it without asking. Word of this incident reached families in the States. Letters of complaint were written to important people, groups that had a history of fighting each other. This might have been in the World War II era. I awoke. Well, it did end up being in the World War II era. I was right about that. And honest to God, when people ask me, how can you be sure that these dreams that you're having are not just your own inventions? One of the things I say is, I'm not that inventive. I really am not. I'm a pretty creative fellow, but I didn't make this up. I don't know who could. But it turned out that the sergeant, his last name was Mason. He showed it to me at the way that it appears on a little strip on a uniform right above the heart, or sometimes it's written on the back of the helmet, your last name. Well, he explained that he did not die in the war, so he did not die violently, and he was belonged to that subset of people who come into our line and whom we help, who had a secret or they had a trauma that they never dealt with appropriately during their lifetime, and that became a part of their afterlife work to do. So he said, here was the problem. I was basically honest man, and I was asked sometimes to be dishonest for the public good, for the war effort. And the story that had the most dark, evil place in his heart was this story. He said, you had to realize that these men lived with lots of deprivation on a battlefield. Back in the States, people were deprived of sugar and eggs and flour and rubber tires or uh, nylons or different consumer goods. But he said on a battlefield, sometimes all these young men got to eat was canned food and hard biscuits. He said it came to pass that somebody got a package from home, um, and in it was chewing gum. The person who received it had set it down somewhere in a public place, not thinking that he needed to protect it. He didn't intend for it to be common communal property. It was his. He set it down, and somebody else came along and said, I'd like some of that, and just took a stick of chewing gum and helped themselves to it. It became a tussle that turned into a fist fight that turned into a gunfight. People died out of frustration and hunger and the fog of war, all of it. But the instigating event was somebody taking chewing gum that didn't belong to them. And American soldiers ended up dead. Is it hard for you to imagine that their superiors didn't want that story told in the press back in the States? So he was told, Mason was told, and he didn't give us his first name, he just went by his last name. He was told to kill the story, not mention it. He said that it was very infrequent that commanding officers wrote their own condolence letters home to family members when a soldier was killed. So that usually was my job. And he said, in this case, I couldn't say to someone, your son was killed because of an argument over chewing gum. He said, all I could say was, your loved one died in the service of his country, things like that. But it just never sat right with him that he knew that in war you want to create a sense of good guys and bad guys, white hats and black hats. And he said a story like this wouldn't support that narrative, that there was infighting, and certainly over something as ridiculous as chewing gum. It was a story that was hard to hear when I heard it the first time, but the way he explained it, I don't see anything unbelievable in there. Things got out of hand and people died over chewing gum. We often ask for the help of a guardian angel with a person that is in the middle of their crossing. And that instead, this time we got Michael the Archangel. I pray to Michael first thing in the morning, as I did this morning. In the summertime, I'm recording this in July. The days are bright and long, and the sun is rising quite early. I remember waking up early this morning, earlier than I really wanted to, but as soon as my eyes came open, I prayed to St. Michael, please protect me. Uh, the St. Michael prayer begins with St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. Well, I pray that prayer every morning. And I don't just pray to Michael in the sky, I pray to Michael in my heart because I believe the body of Christ is all around me and that he's in it. Well, he came through and he described some things. Um, I'm going to read a little of what he said. You can remember, you can believe this or not, it's entirely up to you. He said it sometimes happens in warfare and battlegrounds and times and places that there are units that form where the lines are poorly drawn as to who's in and who's out. Sometimes chieftains or warlords draw from ethnic groups or religious groupings, but sometimes they can be quite fluid. People can change allegiances or sides and end up fighting a former comrade. He said you might be more accustomed when you think of warfare to uniforms that are blue or gray or green. It's quite clear that they're under the flag of this or that brand, this or that nation state. But over the history of the world, a lot of warfare has been fought without colored uniforms or plumage, and where the one who you were allied with today is your enemy the next day. It's just not always quite that neat. He said, in the circumstances you'll help with today, this was during what you call World War II. It was largely a battle of nation states flying under flags and wearing uniforms and insignia. The planes and the tanks were clearly identifiable. Then Michael the Archangel went to my childhood. He said some of these were Father Nathan's playthings in his youth, which is just so odd. Part of the culture of the times involved reliving the war that their parents, mostly their fathers, had fought. He did this in the yard with small toys in the dirt or building forts. Some of their play was about cowboys and Indians, but much more about refighting Nazi Germany. He grew up with television that in one way or another redepicted these battles. Well, boom, that's exactly right. I was born in 1956. There were a lot of cowboy and Indian shows on, but there were also wartime shows and movies and a lot of toy soldiers, tanks, trucks. I don't know why we didn't fight the Japanese, uh, but we sure fought the Germans. We didn't fight the Italians either. Of the three members of the Axis power, somehow our attention was focused on fighting Germans. But we had loads and loads of little plastic soldiers. Um, Compared to the times that you've lived through, uh, today we were actually doing this on the anniversary of 9/11. He said this anniversary day got compared to Pearl Harbor, an unwarranted attack that provoked a warrior response. Media was different in those times. Tales from the battlefront went through a lot of censoring before they made it into broadcasts or into newspapers. People heard what the powerful militaries wanted them to hear. Stories that were unsavory often were untold or could be concealed by a censorship that people had come to expect. Had you received a letter from a loved one in a battlefield somewhere, it was understood that there might be some strike-throughs, or a letter might be altered in some ways to remove any reference to time or place that might be thought of as disclosing military secrets to disadvantage. So people understood that news about the war ran through censors before it got to you. If people weren't thinking about that all the time, all anyone had to do was remind them. Um, I think he used that phrase, loose lips sink ships. Did you grow up with that? I did. So, so our friend Sergeant Mason ended up with this secret that he was wounded by the fact that um, his own government would lie to people and that he was complicit in that lie. Um, that really bothered him, and he went to his grave like that. He said there was just people didn't want to hear a lot of war stories, and the ones that they did want to hear, they didn't want to hear anything that sounded like what he could have told them. So he never told them. He said he avoided things like the VFW halls, Veteran and Foreign Wars halls, or the American Legion. Um, he said he took part in things like patriotic displays on Memorial Day or the 4th of July, but he didn't relish it, and he wanted to be kind of on the edge of it if he was present to it at all, because it just stayed in his heart that when we wanted to describe ourselves as the shining exemplar country, or the champion of all that's good and free and true. He just had this other point of view that he just had to live with. Um, it really bugged him. It bugged him after he died, and that's why he needed to come to truth about it. He said, this involved a culture of secrecy. Some of what is held secret is truth. And when truth is not allowed to be seen in the light, people's progress gets delayed in the afterlife. Sometimes people know what they're saying is a lie, but it's our group's lie. Sometimes the group's code seems to have a higher value for some reason than one knows to be true or untrue. What do you think about that? This is St. Michael. He said, your current politics has a great deal of that going on in it right now. People knowing that they're believing and acting upon things that aren't true, but it's what our group does, and we must do it in order to have the high ground over the other ones. It's that oppositional energy that often will accept falsehood as just the cost of doing business. So I thought this one was one that I wanted to share with you um, because it shows a dilemma of a well-intended young person. He didn't sign on for all this secrecy, but he understood it. It just hadn't occurred to him that there would be that much dissension within the ranks, but then, of course, there was. It turns out that in the afterlife, all he really had to do was work with people who were there to assist him and who knew that this was a sadness and a darkness that was holding him back from being light and free and true to himself. And now it was safe for him to tell these stories without some big problem. Remember, this would have happened in the early 1940s. We didn't get this story until 2021, and it was after he died and after just about everybody that might have been involved in the story had since died. So um, that's the gist of it. What would you do in Mason's circumstance where your commanding officers commanded that you say some things and not other things, or that you write a letter to someone who's to family members of someone who's died in an argument with his peers, and write them a letter saying he died in the service of his country? It just bugged him, and it bugged him throughout his life and into at least the beginning of his afterlife until he could deal with it. And gratefully, there were people there to help him deal with it and to help him forgive himself and move along. Remember that we don't tell any of these stories without going back to that person a second time later to ask if it's okay. We did that recently, and we got his okay. So he said it's long enough in the past now, and he said I didn't identify by name any of the people that were killed or the names of the units or anything like that. He said that's really not my purpose. Uh, but we did speak with him one more time, and I'll reference that in the upcoming segments of this trilogy. But for right now, that's the basics of the story that Sergeant Mason brought us. And it has a lot to do with truth and telling the truth. So that's it for right now. Remember that those of you that are part of this audience, whether you listen to the audio podcast or whether you view it on YouTube, that I think of you a lot. You've become a large part of my ministry. When I pray for you, and I do, I pray for whatever it might be hidden in you that hasn't been able to see the truth. Kind of like Mason. Eventually, he did get released from the burden of that secret. But if there's anything in you that saddens you, that sticks with you, that takes away your joy, that's where I'm praying for you, that the Holy Spirit will find a way into you and somehow lift or give relief to those kind of portions of your life that might not always be seen in the light of day. If you want to be in touch with me, if you're new to learning about me at all, I ask that you read one of my books first. There are four total. One is over my shoulder, the Toto book that's on the wall behind me. There's this one over here is book three of three that are called Afterlife Interrupted. If you'd like to talk with me or you have a question for me, I'd prefer that you read at least one book first. Then, when we are in contact with each other, we'll have, I think, a more fruitful conversation. But for now, that's this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Kelsey, your host, asking God's blessing upon you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless. Have you ever had to do something so difficult that you had to deal with it in stages? Imagine dying suddenly with no forewarning, being in a car crash, a shooting, a drowning. You leave your body, but then what? How do you transition into the afterlife? For some, it flows all at once, but not for everybody. For some, the process of transitioning into the afterlife is interrupted. Maybe there's a need for rest or for learning, or maybe just the chance to adjust to such an abrupt experience. I'm Father Nathan Castle. I'm a Catholic priest. About 23 years ago, the Holy Spirit began to send me people who had died traumatically. They entered my dreams during sleep, showing me what had happened to them and asking for help. They had died and moved on, sort of, but they'd come to a moment where it was time to complete the crossing. With the help of the angels and saints and earthly prayer partners, we've assisted more than 300 souls as they complete their crossing. You can read about it in my book series. Afterlife Interrupted books are available on Amazon. You can also learn more by visiting my website, nathan-castle.com. God bless you.